The air in the lower belly maintenance tunnels was not merely an atmosphere, it was a physical weight, a thick slurry of ionized ozone, copper dust, and the sour, lingering tang of 3,000 unwashed technicians living in the Sanitization Initiative barracks. Kalen Voss, known to the Guild's biometric payroll only as Scrub Tech 9 Alpha, knelt in a pool of iridescent coolant fluid within the gut of ventilation shaft 7G. The air here was a pressurized soup of aerosolized grease and recycled carbon, thick enough to coat the inside of his lungs despite the industrial-grade respirator strapped to his face. The ventilation grate above him rattled with a rhythmic, metallic cough, a sign that the primary turbines were struggling under the increased workload of the audit cycle. Kalen's hands, calloused and stained with the permanent black carbon of the Sanitization Initiative, moved with a practiced, deceptive sluggishness. He felt the vibration of the machinery through his knees, a low-frequency hum that signaled the approach of a heavy-duty cleaning drone. To the overhead security cams, he was just another, Dusty, a low-level cleaner performing the mandated digital bleach of the archive sub-levels. In reality, he was counting the seconds between the sweep of the thermal sensors, a 3-second window where the infrared eye reset its focal point. He reached into the primary junction of a ventilation spider, his fingers brushing against the cold, jagged edge of a contraband onyx link. This wasn't standard Guild tech, it was a ghost chip fashioned from illegal obsidian silicon, designed to absorb data packets without generating the heat signatures that usually triggered a level 1 security sweep. Voss, if you're looking for a promotion in the bottom of that casing, you're a bigger fool than you look, a voice gritted over the localized comms. Kalen didn't jump. He slowly extracted a blackened, melted sensor array from the spider's chassis, holding it up like a trophy. He turned to see Rook looming at the edge of the catwalk. Rook was a mountain of a man, his frame augmented by rusted, third-hand hydraulic pistons in his knees that hissed with every step. His left eye was a whirring Aperture 7 optic, constantly clicking as it recalculated the scrap value of the surrounding pipes. Rook's coveralls were even more stained than Kalen's, smelling of cheap stim tobacco and the burnt sugar scent of hydraulic fluid. "The sensor's fried, Rook," Kalen said, his voice modulated into a flat, uneducated rasp. "The Guild's pushing the audit cycle at 115%. If I don't manual set the intake, this whole sector is going to suffer a thermal cascade. You want to be the one to tell the lead archivist why the tax-exempt crystals melted into slag? That's a lot of paperwork for a guy with one eye." Rook spat a glob of dark stim juice into the open ventilation grate. "I don't tell the archivists anything, kid. Those needle gods don't talk to men who smell like lye. They just look through us like we're glass. You get that spider back on the rail. We've got 4 more blocks of neural sparks to scrub before the shift change, and if the quota drops, the Guild cuts the oxygen rations for the whole barracks. My cybernetic eye doesn't need air, but my lungs still do." "I'm on it," Kalen muttered. He slid the spider back into the dark maw of the shaft, feeling the magnetic legs lock onto the interior rail. But as he did, his thumb pressed a hidden toggle on the bot's underbelly, a switch disguised as a mounting rivet. A phase bypass microarray hummed to life, hidden deep within the bot's legitimate circuitry. This was his scouter. While the spider supposedly cleaned the dust from the vents, it was actually mapping the magnetic logic gates of the high archive 2 miles above them. Kalen watched the bot vanish into the darkness, knowing it was the only thing that could bridge the gap between his lowly scrub terminal and the high-security judgment archives. 3 floors above Kalen, in the pressurized, clinical silence of the clean room, Scylla sat encased in a haptic rig that allowed her to feel the data flow of the needle. Scylla was the lead data miner, a woman who had spent 15 years believing that the Sanitization Initiative was the only thing keeping the galaxy from descending into bureaucratic chaos. To her, every neural spark erased was a bit of entropy removed from the system, a way to keep the complicated gears of civilization spinning without the friction of past mistakes. She watched the node map of the sub-levels, her fingers twitching in the haptic gloves like she was playing an invisible piano. A tiny amber light flickered in Sector 7G. 9 Alpha is dragging again, she murmured, her voice soft in the vacuum quiet of the room. She pulled up Kalen's biometric feed. Heart rate is steady, but his terminal handshake is lagging by 400 milliseconds. It's consistent. Too consistent for a hardware glitch. He's a grunt, Scylla, her assistant, Elion, said without looking up from his own monitors. Elion was a nervous man, his fingers constantly tapping a rapid, erratic beat on his desk. They all lag, probably huffing coolant vapor to forget they live in a hole. Or maybe he's just slow. Not everyone was born with a data port in their skull like you. Scylla frowned. Something about the lag wasn't random. It wasn't the slow, clumsy movement of a tired laborer. It was rhythmic. It felt like a heartbeat underlying the data stream. She initiated a deep trace subroutine, bypassing the standard supervisor filters with a series of complex keystrokes. She wasn't looking for a traitor. She was looking for efficiency, for the perfect alignment of man and machine. But as the trace descended into the sub-levels, it hit a shadow salt encryption gate. Elion, why would a maintenance terminal in the laundry subdeck have a 256-bit shadow guild salt on its diagnostic port? Scylla asked, her eyes narrowing behind her data lenses. Elion froze, his tapping fingers falling silent. He looked at her screen, then quickly looked away. It wouldn't. That's high ministry level. If you found that, Scylla, you should close the window and report a hardware glitch. Don't look at it, please, just, sanitizing the records is safe. Looking into the plumbing isn't. People who look into the plumbing end up as bioclutter in the reclamation bins. Scylla's curiosity was her greatest strength and her most dangerous flaw. Instead of closing the window, she began a passive interrogation of the salt, her mind calculating the frequency shifts in the encryption. She didn't realize that by doing so, she was stepping onto the same bridge Kalen was building from below. She began to see the shadow packets, ghosts of data that shouldn't exist, moving with deliberate intent toward Terminal 84. The transit from the lower belly to the high ministry was a physical manifestation of the guild's hierarchy. Kalen stood in the transit tube, feeling the stomach-churning G-force as the maglev elevator shot upward through the toxic, neon-smeared clouds of the central sector. He watched the lights of the city below shrink into a glowing, polluted carpet. When the doors opened at the archive level, the humidity vanished instantly. The air was chilled to exactly 4 degrees Celsius, the perfect temperature for data crystal stability. It was silent, sterile, and smelled of nothing but dry nitrogen and the faint, metallic tang of the cleaning lasers. At the entrance, Kalen faced the biometric threshold. He didn't just present a badge, he had to submit to a deep scan. He felt the familiar, invasive tingle of the laser sweeping across his retinas, a sensation like hot sand behind his eyelids. He placed his hand on the terminal pad, feeling the cold prick of the DNA sampler as it drew a microscopic bead of blood for verification. Identity confirmed. Scrub Tech 9 Alpha, a synthesized voice announced. Assigned task, Level 2 Sanitization. Objective, total erasure of outer rim tax discrepancies, years 2080 to 2085. Note, any attempted data mirroring will be met with immediate competency filter isolation. Your shift ends in 359 minutes. Kalen walked to Terminal 84, his boots clicking rhythmically on the polished obsidian floor. He sat down, the haptic interface cooling his sweaty palms. As the screen flared to life, a flood of encrypted, neural sparks cascaded across his vision, shifting violet and blue lights that contained the digital memories of the guild. These were the receipts of their sins, the hidden ledgers of a galactic empire. Dusty, I'm watching you, Scylla's voice crackled in his ear, sounding distant and strange. I saw the lag in the maintenance bay. If you're running a side hustle on guild processors, stop now. I'm seeing unauthorized power draws in your sector that shouldn't be there. Don't make me report you. Kalen took a slow, steady breath, modulating his pulse to avoid triggering the stress sensors in his chair. Just the terminal being stubborn, Scylla. The encryption salts in the 2082 batch are archaic. I have to manually decouple the logic nodes before I can hit delete. It's slow work, and the cooling pump is throwing errors. I'm just trying to keep the hardware from melting. Make it faster, she snapped, though there was a new tremor in her voice Kalen hadn't heard before, a note of fear or perhaps realization. The guild doesn't pay for craftsmanship. They pay for silence. We are the janitors of history, boss. Don't forget that. Kalen worked the scrub for 3 hours, acting as the perfect, mindless drone. He deleted manifests of illegal weapon shipments to the core worlds. He erased the tax haven records of the high magistrates. Each deletion felt like a stab to his conscience, a piece of justice being removed from the universe. But he had to wait. He was looking for the AEGIS file. He knew it existed because the Remnant Coalition had sacrificed their lives to give him the tip-off. It was the manual override for the entire guild system, a record so damning it would force the legislation of the Outer Rim to intervene. Then, buried inside a weather data packet for the Vesper 9 mining colony, he found the logic snag. It was encrypted with a 256-bit Shadow Guild salt, the same one Scylla had spotted earlier. Kalen's breath hitched. He deployed a ghost logic subroutine, a phantom loop that kept Scylla's monitors showing a steady stream of deletions, while he peeled back the layers of the snag with a surgeon's focus. The file opened. It wasn't a spreadsheet, it was a series of sensory logs from the Vesper 9 atmospheric dome. Atmospheric thinning initiated, a recorded voice droned, chillingly calm. Kalen recognized the voice. It was High Magistrate Kroll, the man who oversaw the very sector they were currently cleaning. Oxygen levels in the civilian residential blocks are now at 12%. Symptom onset: 3 minutes. Total bioclutter neutralized in 6 hours. Mining rigs are standing by for the mineral reclamation. Ensure all communication lines are purged by the Sanitization Initiative. Kalen's hand trembled on the haptic pad. This wasn't just a record of theft, it was a record of mass murder for profit. 50,000 families on Vesper 9, miners, engineers, children, were being suffocated so the guild could save 2% on their extraction costs and avoid the legal headache of relocation. He checked the timestamp. The final thinning was scheduled for the next lunar cycle. It hadn't happened yet, but it was being erased in advance. In the clean room, Scylla saw exactly what Kalen saw. Because she had initiated the deep trace earlier and held the interrogation open, her haptic rig had accidentally mirrored Kalen's terminal. The visual log of the Vesper 9 colony projected onto her retinas like a nightmare. She saw the faces of the children in the red dust of the colony dome, their lungs struggling as the oxygen scrubbers were remotely throttled to a crawl. She heard Kroll's cold, calculated voice treating 50,000 lives like bio-clutter. "Elion," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard the haptic sensors glitched, sending static through her fingertips. "Vesper 9. The asteroid incident from the news last month, it wasn't an accident. We're scrubbing the evidence of a massacre that's about to happen. Look at the digital signature. Kroll signed this yesterday. He's deleting the crime before he even commits it." Elion didn't look up. He looked terrified, his skin turning a sickly shade of gray under the sterile lights. "Scylla, delete the trace. Now. If you know, you're an accomplice. If you report it, you're a corpse. Just hit the sanitize button and let 9 Alpha finish his shift. We are just the cleaners, Scylla. We don't decide what's dirt and what's evidence. We just make sure the guild looks perfect." Scylla looked at her hands. The haptic gloves, once symbols of her authority and precision, now felt like shackles. For 15 years, she had been the lead miner, the woman who ensured the guild's records were clean. She realized now that clean just meant empty of witnesses. She saw the faces of the miners on the screen, people she had never met, whose deaths were being facilitated by her own fingers on the keys. She saw Kalen's terminal cursor hover over the delete button. She saw him hesitate. Through the biometric feed, she felt his heart rate skyrocket to 145 BPM. She realized he wasn't a grunt. He was a ghost. He was exactly what the guild feared most, a man with a conscience and a wrench. He was the manual override in a system built of cold code. "Do it, 9 Alpha, she whispered, not over the comms, but to herself, her tears blurring the data on her lenses until the numbers became streaks of light. "Don't let them bury this one. Mirror it. Please, for the love of whatever stars are left, mirror it." Kalen bit down hard on his back molar. The ceramics shattered with a sickening, internal crunch. He spat the onyx link into his palm, a tiny, razor-sharp shard of obsidian, and jammed it into the terminal's emergency maintenance port with a force that nearly cracked the console. Alarm! Unauthorized data mirror detected. Sector 84 compromised. Enforcement teams deployed. The terminal shrieked, the sterile blue lights of the archive turning a predatory, pulsing crimson. The high-pitched siren wailed, a sound designed to induce panic and disorientation. Kalen didn't wait. He activated the Midnight Sun protocol. Through his wrist comm, he signaled the spider bot latched to the data trunk 2 miles away in the ventilation vents. The bot shorted its internal fusion cell, creating a massive electromagnetic pulse that tore through the archive's local firewalls from the inside out. The mirroring began. The AEGIS file wasn't just being copied, it was being broadcasted on the Guild's own emergency disaster frequencies, the only channels the High Ministry couldn't legally block without shutting down the entire sector's life support and air circulation. Security to Terminal 84. Lethal force authorized. Scrubtech 9 Alpha is a ghost. Director Thorne, the man who oversaw the clean room, roared as he burst into Sila's workspace. Sila. Lockdown Node 84. Use the competency filter, override now. Kill his terminal, fry his neural shunts if he has them. Sila looked at Thorne, then at the terminal. Her fingers moved with a speed she'd never used before, her hands shaking but her purpose clear. She wasn't locking Kalen out. She began a lateral encryption shift, creating a digital tunnel that protected Kalen's mirror stream from the Guild's automated countermeasures. She was effectively acting as his digital shield, parrying the system's attempts to sever the link. I can't lock it, Director. Sila lied, her voice filled with feigned, panicked desperation, her eyes wide with manufactured fear. The 9 Alpha terminal has slaved the core. It's running a shadow salt feedback loop. If I cut the power, the whole archive goes into a thermal cascade. We'll lose the entire year's records. Then pull the physical core. Thorne yelled, his face purple with rage as he ran toward the server banks with a magnetic disruptor. Sila blocked his path, her eyes wild, her heart pounding. If you disrupt the core during a pulse mirror, the magnetic backlash will fry the neural shunts of every shell in the building. You'll kill thousands of workers. The Guild will have to pay out more in death benefits than the mineral reclaim is worth. Move, Sila. That's a corporate expense, not a concern. Thorne shoved her aside, but the delay was enough. The mirror was already at 85%. The archive's heavy alloy doors hissed open with a blast of pressurized air. Commander Vane of the Eraser Squads stepped through the vapor, his amber thermal optics glowing like coals in the red emergency lighting. He held a high-frequency pulse rifle, the barrel humming as it charged to lethal levels. Behind him, 4 shells in tactical gear moved with mechanical precision, their rifles raised. Voss, Vane said, his voice a distorted rasp through his helmet's vocalizer. You're a long way from the mud, Ghost. You think mirroring that file changes anything? The Guild is the record. We write the truth. And right now, the truth is that you're about to suffer a fatal atmospheric malfunction. Nobody is going to read your little story. History is written by the survivors, and you're not on the list. Kalen dove behind an iridium data stack just as a blue streak of ionized energy vaporized the terminal he'd been sitting at. The heat was intense, the smell of melting silicon and ozone filling the room. The problem with writing the truth, Vane, is that eventually, someone learns how to read the margins. And I've been reading yours for years. You're not an author, you're just a glorified shredder. Kalen pulled his legacy Kinetic sidearm from his toolkit, a heavy, archaic piece of iron with no electronics and no energy signatures for Vane's sensors to track. He fired 2 rounds into the overhead fire suppression tanks. A deluge of liquid nitrogen and retardant foam exploded into the room, creating a localized whiteout that blinded Vane's advanced optics and created a freezing, slippery chaos. I can see your heat signature, Voss. You're glowing like a sun in this cold. There is no escape, Vane roared, firing blindly into the fog. The pulse fire melted the data crystals into glowing violet slag, the energy release cracking the obsidian floor. But Kalen had already deployed the multi-phase ghost loom, a cluster of tiny projectors that flickered to life in the mist. 3 holographic versions of Kalen Voss suddenly sprinted through the foam in divergent directions, their thermal signatures perfectly tuned to mimic a panicked human. Vane and his enforcers opened fire on the decoys, their high-frequency rifles shredding the holographic phantoms with bursts of blue light. While the hunters focused on the phantoms, the real Kalen crawled through the maintenance floor plates, his back inches from the vibrating alloy as he moved toward the exit. He reached the primary elevator bank, but he didn't call the car. He knew the Guild would have already locked the gravity brakes on all civilian floors. He used a magnetic pry bar to force the doors open, revealing the obsidian-lined shaft. He looked up. 2 miles of vertical abyss stood between him and the master relay spire. He fired his grappling winch, the carbon fiber line singing as it hooked onto a service rail high above. He's in the shaft. Climb teams, Intercept. Secure the spire. An enforcer yelled from the archive doors. Kalen engaged the motorized winch, feeling the brutal G-force as he was yanked upward into the darkness. Below him, the enforcers fired upward, their pulse streaks illuminating the shaft like lightning. Kalen reached into his pocket and dropped a localized EMP seed. As the device fell, it detonated halfway down, shorting out the maglev rails of a descending elevator car filled with backup enforcers. The 3-ton car plummeted, crushing the primary pursuit squad at the base of the shaft in a violent explosion of sparks, screaming metal, and collapsing obsidian. Kalen reached the master relay spire at the very pinnacle of the Needle of the Gods. The wind here was a screaming, freezing gale that threatened to rip the skin from his face and pull him off the narrow maintenance platform. He scrambled onto the relay deck, his fingers numb and bleeding, his tactical gear shredded by his ascent. Below him, the central sector was a sea of light and shadow. The mirroring was complete. Every public screen, every corporate kiosk, every personal comms link, and even the holographic billboards in the luxury districts were playing the Vesper 9 logs. The names of the magistrates, the signatures on the death warrants, and the coordinates of the mining rigs were cascading across the horizon in a flood of undeniable truth. The city was waking up. He saw the gunships below circling the ministry, but their formation was breaking. The weapons were no longer looking for a ghost. They were being turned against each other as the rank-and-file soldiers, many of whom had family in the outer rim, realized they were the ones who would have been ordered to fire on the miners. A revolution was igniting in the sky. Kalen slammed his hand onto the spire's core, feeling the massive data flow vibrating through his palm. Master Spark initiated, mirroring to the outer rim legislation. Now, let the stars hear it. Let them judge the gods. In the clean room, Scylla watched the final data burst leave the station, a brilliant pulse of light on her monitors. She saw Director Thorne being hauled away by a group of shells, whose neural shunts had fried from the EM surge, restoring their free will and their anger. Thorne was screaming about competency and order, but nobody was listening. The silence was absolute. Scylla stood up, pulling off her haptic gloves and dropping them onto the floor like discarded skins. She looked at Elion, who was still staring at the screen in shock. "It's done, Elion. The record isn't clean anymore. It's just the truth. And the truth is heavy." "What happens now?" Elion asked, his voice small and trembling. "Now," Scylla said, looking toward the elevator where the lights were finally returning to a steady, calm blue, "we find out if we're worth saving. We stop being the cleaners and start being the witnesses." The hum of the clean room was shattered not by an explosion, but by the heavy, rhythmic thud of maglock boots. Scylla stood motionless, her bare hands feeling the raw, unfiltered air of the room for the first time in years. Beside her, Elion was a statue of terror, his eyes glued to the monitors where the AEGIS file continued to loop across the sector's emergency frequencies. The steady, calm blue light of the elevator bank suddenly flickered, strobing into a jagged, aggressive amber. The special police, the guild's personal Praetorian Guard, had arrived to sanitize the witnesses. "Elion, get behind the primary server bank," Scylla commanded, her voice losing its tremor and hardening into the tone of a woman who had just seen the end of the world and decided she didn't mind. "If they breach the door, they'll aim for the consoles first. They need to stop the broadcast before they kill us." The heavy reinforced doors hissed open, but it wasn't the special police who stepped through first. It was a squad of station security, the regular, blue coats, who lived in the same barracks as Kalen and Rook. They looked disoriented, their rifles lowered. Behind them, through the translucent hallway, the silhouette of the special police was visible, moving like a wall of obsidian, their heavy shields reflecting the red emergency strobes. "Scylla," the lead security officer, a grizzled veteran named Hark, called out. His voice was cracked with disbelief. "That broadcast. My brother is on VESPER 9. He's a foreman in the residential block. Is that log real? Did the magistrate really sign that thinning order?" Scylla stepped forward, her shadow stretching long across the floor. "He signed it yesterday, Hark. If we don't hold this room, if we let the special police shut down that relay, your brother will be bio-clutter by the next lunar cycle. You're not security anymore. You're the only thing standing between your family and a corporate eraser." Hark looked at the hall, then back at Scylla. He saw the truth in her eyes, the weight of 15 years of lies finally being cast off. He turned to his squad, his face hardening. "Seal the doors. We're not protecting the archive. We're protecting the broadcast." The climax of the Needle's fall began in that narrow corridor. The Special Police, led by a ruthless tactical officer named Captain Drax, deployed Screamer grenades that sent high-frequency waves through the air, designed to liquefy the inner ears of anyone not wearing Guild-issued dampeners. The bluecoats buckled, blood leaking from their ears, but they didn't retreat. They had seen the faces of their families on the screens. In the midst of the chaos, Kalen Voss appeared from the ceiling vents, dropping like a shadow into the clean room. He was covered in soot and obsidian dust, his legacy sidearm still hot in his hand. He didn't look at the battle in the hall. He looked at Scylla. "I need a physical override," Kalen grunted, his lungs burning from the ascent. "The relay spire is broadcasting, but the Special Police are attempting a hard wire bypass from the subdeck 4 junction. If they cut the fiber optics there, the mirroring stops before it hits the outer rim. I can't get back down there in time." Scylla grabbed a handheld haptic controller, her fingers flying over the manual interface. "I can't stop them from the clean room, Kalen. They've bypassed the software. But I can change the environment. Elion, the cooling vats. What is the pressure in the liquid nitrogen reserves for the server racks?" Elion, shivering but functional, checked his tablet. "It's at 4,000 psi. "Why?" "Because," Scylla said, a grim smile touching her lips, "if we can't stop them with code, we'll stop them with physics." The interaction that tipped the scales involved a three-way coordination that bypassed the Guild's superior firepower. Kalen took up a sniping position at the clean room door, using his kinetic sidearm to pick off the power cells on the Special Police's shields. Each shot was a masterclass in logistics. He wasn't aiming for the men, but for the mechanical joints of their armor, slowing the obsidian wall just enough to give Hark and the Bluecoats a fighting chance. "Hark!" Kalen yelled over the roar of pulse fire. "Fall back to the secondary bulkhead. Draw them onto the floor grates." Hark understood. He ordered his men to retreat, making it look like the security line was breaking. Captain Drax and his Special Police surged forward, their heavy boots clanking on the metal grates that sat directly above the archive's massive liquid nitrogen cooling vats. They were 50 feet from the clean room, their weapons leveled for a final execution. "Now, Scylla," Kalen roared. Scylla didn't use a weapon. She used the archive's maintenance protocol. With a single, forceful keystroke, she triggered an emergency thermal purge. The valves beneath the floor grates didn't just open, they exploded. A wall of super-chilled liquid nitrogen erupted from beneath the Special Police. It wasn't a slow leak, it was a high-pressure geyser. The liquid hit the heated obsidian armor of the Special Police and the air-conditioned atmosphere of the hallway, creating an instantaneous thermal shock. In less than a second, the obsidian plating of the Guild's elite guards didn't just freeze, it shattered like glass. Their heavy shields, made of reinforced composite, cracked into thousands of jagged shards. The Special Police were frozen in place, their advanced armor becoming their own tombs as the joints locked and the metal contracted with a violent screech. Captain Drax tried to raise his rifle, but the barrel simply snapped off in his frozen hand. The clever resolve wasn't just the nitrogen, it was the mirroring of the command net. While the Special Police were immobilized, Scylla routed the audio of their defeat, the sound of Drax's panic and the shattering of their invincible gear, directly into the helmets of every other Guild unit on the station. She showed them that the gods were made of brittle clay. "The broadcast is secure," Scylla whispered, her breath hitching as she watched the data stream hit 100% saturation. "The outer rim has the logs. The Judgment archives have the signatures." The battle in the hall ceased as the remaining Guild enforcers realized the war was already over. They weren't fighting for a record anymore, they were fighting for a ghost. One by one, they lowered their weapons, looking at the screens that still flickered with the truth of VESPER-9. Kalen stepped into the hall, passing the frozen statues of the Special Police. He reached Hark, who was leaning against a wall, his ears still ringing but a look of profound relief on his face. Kalen handed the grizzled officer his legacy sidearm. "The station is yours, Hark," Kalen said. "The people are going to have a lot of questions. You should be the one to answer them." Kalen returned to the clean room. Scylla was still standing by her console, her hands resting on the cold metal. The room was silent now, the clinical hum replaced by the distant sound of the city below, a sound of thousands of voices rising in a single, unified roar of reclamation. You saved them, Kalen said, standing beside her. The physical override was clever, but the digital shield you built for me, that's what finished it. Scylla looked at her bare hands, now stained with the grime of the battle. I spent 15 years erasing the truth, Kalen. I think I finally balanced the ledger. What happens to us now? We're the most wanted people in the galaxy. No, Kalen said, looking toward the window where the purple aurora of the data burst was still fading into a clear, blue morning. We're the only people who know where the rest of the bodies are buried. The guild left a lot of dirt in the sublevels. I think it's time we finish the cleaning. Properly this time. The record is mirrored. The truth is preserved. The void is silent. Finality. Absolute. Total. Reclamation. Done.